The bride told everyone I had a crush on her because I caught her sneaking out of a motel 2 days before the wedding. I had proof. No one wanted it. My parents told me to drop it. She walked down the aisle smiling. But as they signed the marriage license, some guy burst into the hall shouting her name. And my cousin Jake was marrying his college sweetheart Victoria in what everyone called the wedding of the decade. Their families had been friends for generations, and the entire extended network of relatives and friends had been planning this celebration for over a year. The ceremony was set to take place at the historic Riverside Manor, complete with gardens that stretched down to the waterfront and a reception hall that could accommodate 300 guests. 2 days before the wedding, I drove to the venue to drop off some decorations my aunt had forgotten at her house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as I pulled up to the side entrance. The manor looked peaceful and elegant, with white ribbons already adorning the garden archway where Jake and Victoria would exchange vows. As I walked toward the building carrying boxes of centerpieces, I noticed a familiar car parked behind the maintenance shed. The blue sedan belonged to Victoria, but something seemed off about her being there so late without Jake. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. Following a stone path that wound around the building, I spotted Victoria emerging from a side door of the Sunset Motel, which sat just beyond the manor property. She was adjusting her hair and looking around nervously, clearly not expecting anyone to see her. My stomach dropped as I realized what I was witnessing. A man emerged from the same door moments later, someone I recognized as Trevor, who worked at the catering company handling the wedding reception. He was older than Victoria by at least 15 years, married with children, and had been flirting with her during the planning meetings. They embraced briefly before walking to separate cars. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and managed to capture several photos of them together. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Victoria was having an affair just 48 hours before she was supposed to marry my cousin. That evening, I wrestled with the decision of whether to tell Jake immediately. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the next night, and the wedding was in less than 2 days. Hundreds of guests were already arriving in town. The vendors were all confirmed, and both families had invested enormous amounts of money and emotional energy into this celebration. I decided to approach Victoria first, hoping she would come clean to Jake herself. I called her that night and asked to meet at a coffee shop downtown. When she arrived, she looked radiant and excited, chattering about last-minute wedding details and how perfect everything was going to be. When I showed her the photos on my phone, her face went completely pale. For several minutes, she sat in stunned silence, staring at the images that clearly showed her and Trevor together outside the motel room. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down or admitting her mistake, Victoria became furious. She accused me of stalking her, of being obsessed with ruining her happiness, and of harboring romantic feelings for her that I was acting out through vindictive behavior. Her voice rose as she claimed I had always been jealous of her relationship with Jake and was now manufacturing drama to destroy their wedding day. The coffee shop grew quiet as other patrons turned to stare at our heated exchange. Victoria stood up abruptly, declared that she would tell everyone about my supposed obsession with her, and stormed out of the building. The next morning brought a series of phone calls that changed everything. Victoria had apparently spent the entire night reaching out to family members and friends, spinning a narrative that painted me as a delusional cousin who had developed unhealthy feelings for her and was now trying to sabotage the wedding out of jealousy and spite. My aunt called first, her voice filled with disappointment and concern. She explained that Victoria had tearfully confessed to her about my alleged harassment and showed what she claimed were doctored photographs. According to Victoria's version of events, I had been making her uncomfortable for months with inappropriate comments and attention, and now I was desperately trying to break up her relationship with Jake. My parents were the next to contact me, and their reaction was perhaps the most devastating. They urged me to drop the matter completely, explaining that the wedding was too important to both families to risk disrupting over what they called unfounded accusations. They reminded me that hundreds of guests were already in town, that canceling would be financially ruinous for both families, and that creating drama at this point would only hurt innocent people. Jake himself called that afternoon, his voice strained and confused. He explained that Victoria had shown him the photos I had taken, but she had convinced him they depicted an innocent conversation with a vendor about catering arrangements. She had also shared her version of my supposed romantic pursuit, which included alleged text messages and phone calls that I had never made. The most painful part of the conversation was hearing the doubt in Jake's voice. We had grown up together, spent countless summers at family gatherings, and had always been close. Yet Victoria's manipulation was so thorough and convincing that even he was beginning to question my motives and mental state. By the evening of the rehearsal dinner, The entire extended family had heard Victoria's version of events. The gathering that was supposed to be a joyful celebration became an awkward and tense affair. Relatives who had known me my entire life now looked at me with suspicion and disappointment. Some avoided making eye contact altogether, while others offered polite but strained conversation. Victoria played her role perfectly throughout the evening. She appeared gracious and forgiving, occasionally placing a gentle hand on Jake's arm while casting worried glances in my direction. She had positioned herself as the victim of an unstable and obsessed family member, and her performance was flawless. The rehearsal went smoothly despite the underlying tension. Victoria and Jake practiced their vows in the garden while the wedding party went through their choreographed entrance and positioning. The officiant, a family friend who had known both families for decades, beamed with pride as he guided them through the ceremony. That night, I lay awake in my hotel room, staring at the photos on my phone and wondering if I was losing my mind. The evidence seemed clear to me, but everyone else had accepted Victoria's explanation so readily. Part of me began to doubt what I had actually witnessed, wondering if there was some innocent explanation I had missed. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Victoria and Trevor had been having an affair. The way they had emerged from the motel room, the nervous way they had looked around, the intimate embrace they had shared all pointed to a relationship that went far beyond professional catering discussions. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony. The Riverside Manor looked spectacular, decorated with thousands of white roses and flowing ribbons that created an atmosphere of romance and elegance. Guests began arriving early, dressed in their finest clothes and carrying expensive gifts for the happy couple. I had decided to attend the wedding despite the family pressure and social awkwardness. Part of me still hoped that Victoria would come to her senses and confess the truth to Jake before it was too late. Another part of me felt obligated to witness what I believed would be the biggest mistake of my cousin's life. The bridal party gathered in the manor's preparation rooms, where professional photographers captured every moment of the pre-ceremony activities. Victoria looked absolutely stunning in her designer gown, surrounded by 6 bridesmaids who fussed over her hair and makeup. She radiated confidence and joy, showing no signs of guilt or second thoughts about what she was doing. Jake waited nervously in the groom's preparation area with his groomsmen, adjusting his tie repeatedly and making jokes to calm his pre-wedding jitters. He had chosen me as one of his groomsmen months earlier, and despite the recent tension, he had decided not to remove me from the wedding party. The gesture felt both generous and heartbreaking. As the ceremony time approached, the guests took their seats in the garden. The string quartet began playing soft classical music while the officiant took his position at the altar. The atmosphere was magical, with late afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees and casting a golden glow over the assembled family and friends. The processional began with the bridesmaids walking down the aisle in their coordinated dusty rose dresses. Each woman carried a bouquet of white peonies and smiled radiantly at the guests. The crowd murmured appreciatively at how beautiful everything looked and how perfect the weather had turned out to be. When the bridal march began, everyone rose to their feet and turned toward the back of the garden. Victoria appeared at the far end of the aisle on her father's arm, looking like something out of a fairy tale. Her dress was a masterpiece of intricate beadwork and flowing silk, and her veil trailed behind her for several feet. Jake's face lit up with pure joy as he watched his bride walk toward him. The love in his expression was unmistakable, and for a moment I wondered if I was wrong about everything. Perhaps Victoria's explanation was true, and I had misinterpreted what I had seen at the motel. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly, with the couple exchanging heartfelt vows they had written themselves. Victoria spoke about finding her soulmate and promising to be faithful and honest for the rest of their lives together. Jake promised to love and protect her through all of life's challenges and adventures. Their words were beautiful and seemed completely sincere. The officiant guided them through the traditional wedding rituals, including the exchange of rings and the lighting of a unity candle. The crowd was completely captivated by the romance and emotion of the moment. Several guests wiped away tears as the couple sealed their commitment with a passionate kiss. As they turned to face the assembled guests as husband and wife, the photographer captured the moment with dozens of photos. Victoria's smile was radiant and triumphant, while Jake looked overwhelmed with happiness and relief. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as the newlyweds began their recessional walk down the aisle. But just as they reached the halfway point of their exit, something unexpected happened that changed everything. The sound of a car door slamming echoed across the garden, followed by the rapid footsteps of someone running toward the ceremony. A man burst through the entrance to the garden area, his face flushed and his clothes disheveled from what appeared to be a long and frantic journey. Trevor, the caterer I had seen Victoria with at the motel, stopped in the middle of the aisle and shouted her name with desperate urgency. His voice carried across the entire gathering, causing the music to stop abruptly and every head to turn in his direction. The peaceful wedding atmosphere shattered in an instant. Victoria froze in place, her bouquet trembling in her hands as she stared at Trevor with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Jake looked confused, glancing between his new wife and the man who had interrupted their most important moment. The wedding guests began murmuring among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Trevor began speaking rapidly and emotionally, his words carrying clearly across the silent garden. He declared his love for Victoria and begged her not to go through with the marriage. He revealed that they had been having an affair for over 6 months and that she had promised to break up with Jake after the engagement party. The revelation hit the wedding guests like a physical blow. Gasps and shocked exclamations rippled through the crowd as people struggled to process what they were hearing. Victoria's parents looked mortified, while Jake's family stared in stunned disbelief at the scene unfolding before them. But Trevor wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and began reading text messages aloud, intimate communications between him and Victoria that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The messages included explicit details about their meetings at the motel and Victoria's complaints about feeling trapped in her engagement to Jake. Victoria finally found her voice and began screaming at Trevor to stop and leave immediately. She denied everything he was saying and claimed he was mentally unstable and obsessed with her. Her protests became increasingly frantic as Trevor continued revealing more and more damaging information about their affair. Jake stood motionless, his face cycling through emotions of confusion, hurt, and growing anger as the truth became undeniable. The wedding photographer continued taking pictures out of professional habit, capturing every moment of the disaster unfolding before the assembled guests. The situation escalated when Trevor revealed that Victoria was pregnant with his child. He had discovered this information that morning when his wife found medical documents Victoria had left in his car. The pregnancy was approximately 10 weeks along, making it impossible for Jake to be the father since he had been traveling for work during that time period. The garden erupted into chaos as this final revelation sank in. Victoria collapsed to her knees in her wedding dress, finally admitting through tears that everything Trevor had said was true. Jake staggered backward as if he had been physically struck, while both sets of parents rushed forward to try to manage the crisis. Several male guests moved to physically restrain Trevor, who was now shouting about how Victoria had ruined his marriage and destroyed his family when his wife discovered their affair. His own wife had kicked him out of their house that morning after finding evidence of the relationship, and he had driven straight to the wedding to prevent Victoria from deceiving Jake any further. The officiant, who had performed hundreds of weddings over his career, had never witnessed anything like this catastrophe. He stood helplessly at the altar, still holding the marriage certificate that would never be signed, as the celebration he had been conducting disintegrated into a nightmare of betrayal and broken trust. Within minutes, the garden was in complete pandemonium. Some guests began leaving immediately, uncomfortable with witnessing such a private family disaster. Others gathered in small groups, whispering and trying to piece together what had just happened. The catering staff stood frozen, unsure whether to continue with the reception preparations. Victoria's bridesmaids surrounded her, trying to help her to her feet and shield her from the staring crowd. Her wedding dress was now stained with grass and dirt from kneeling on the ground, and her carefully arranged hair had come loose from its elegant styling. The fairy tale image she had projected just minutes earlier was completely destroyed. Jake finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow audible across the entire garden. He told Victoria that their marriage was over before it had even begun, removed his wedding ring, and walked away from the altar without looking back. His groomsmen followed him, leaving Victoria alone with her bridesmaids and the wreckage of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The aftermath of the wedding disaster rippled through both families and their social circles for months afterward. The expensive reception was canceled immediately, with vendors scrambling to deal with the sudden change in plans. The catered dinner for 300 guests was donated to a local homeless shelter, while the elaborate wedding cake sat untouched in the manor's kitchen. Jake filed for an annulment within a week, citing fraud and deception as grounds for dissolving the marriage that had lasted less than 30 minutes. Victoria did not contest the legal proceedings, perhaps understanding that she had no reasonable defense for her actions. The annulment was granted quickly and quietly, with both parties agreeing to avoid any further public spectacle. Trevor's marriage did not survive the revelation of his affair. His wife filed for divorce and sought full custody of their 2 children, using his admission of infidelity and the very public nature of his breakdown as evidence of his unfitness as a parent. He lost his job with the catering company immediately and struggled to find work in the food service industry after word spread about his role in the wedding scandal. Victoria moved to another state shortly after the annulment was finalized, apparently seeking a fresh start away from the families and community that had witnessed her humiliation. She gave birth to Trevor's child several months later, but chose not to contact him about the baby's arrival. The pregnancy had been another deception in her web of lies. As medical records later revealed, she had known about her condition for weeks before the wedding. My own reputation within the family was completely rehabilitated once the truth came out. Relatives who had shunned me at the rehearsal dinner called to apologize and admit they should have listened to my concerns. My parents were particularly remorseful about pressuring me to stay silent, acknowledging that their desire to avoid family drama had nearly allowed an innocent person to be victimized by Victoria's deceptions. Jake took the betrayal hard and required months of therapy to process what had happened to him. He eventually realized that Victoria had never truly loved him and had likely been using their relationship for financial security and social status. The expensive engagement ring he had given her was never returned, adding financial injury to the emotional damage she had caused. The wedding venue itself became somewhat infamous in local social circles, with several couples changing their plans to avoid the location associated with such a spectacular romantic disaster. The Riverside Manor eventually had to offer significant discounts to book future weddings as word spread about what had happened in their garden. The most lasting consequence was the permanent fracturing of relationships between the two families. Victoria's parents, who had initially supported her version of events and blamed me for the problems, found it impossible to maintain friendships with Jake's family after the truth emerged. Years of close connection and shared history were destroyed by their daughter's actions and their own failure to see through her manipulation. For me personally, the experience served as a harsh lesson about the importance of speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable or unwelcome. I had been right to trust my instincts about what I had witnessed, and I learned that sometimes doing the right thing requires standing alone against popular opinion. The wedding disaster vindicated my decision to gather evidence and attempt to warn Jake, even though the truth emerged too late to prevent the initial ceremony from taking place. The story became legendary within our extended family and social circle, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and the importance of truly knowing someone before making such a significant commitment. Jake eventually found love again with someone who valued honesty and transparency, but he remained much more cautious and observant in his relationships going forward. The dramatic revelation at the altar became one of those family stories that gets retold at gatherings for years afterward, though always with a sense of sadness for the pain that so many innocent people endured because of Victoria's selfish choices and Trevor's decision to handle his crisis in such a destructive manner. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.